Every few months, I like to go to my friend Dr. Laura Conover's website, intuitionphysician.com, and see if she's pulled any really interesting earthing or grounding information. You see, she's my go-to expert when it comes to earthing and grounding. And sure enough, this time around, I came across a really great research article about grounding and mitochondrial function that was published, I believe, just this past February. And so Dr. Conover actually wrote the article herself and did a very amazing deep dive into the many ways in which it appears as though being earthed or grounded are directly influencing mitochondrial function. Okay, so I'm going to do just a quick share here, just so I can show you a couple of just one what would I call it, like figure, if you will, from her article. And then I'm going to just kind of like break down the article a little bit more because I think it's a very great one. And I'll link the article below in case you're interested, but you'll also see it highlighted on this slide. So here are all the things that Dr. Laura essentially was able to show based on the research in terms of how earthing and grounding support mitochondrial function. Now, first and foremost, what are we talking about with earthing and grounding? Well, we could be talking about making direct contact with essentially living earth, if you will, the parts of the earth that have a negative surface charge. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But we also are talking about with a lot of this research that this is done in a laboratory setting where essentially patients or animals or even cell cultures are grounded via using things like the grounding port, the grounding prong in an outlet. So it can be both, right? I always say, when in doubt, do earthing and grounding outdoors whenever you can. But I think that there's a misconception in the field of earthing and grounding and non-native electromagnetic field exposure that we would never, ever possibly want to ground in an environment that has high non-native EMFs. And just through all of the research that I have read, including research of babies in a NICU unit who have much better outcomes when they're grounded. There's multiple studies actually in hospitals in that type of setting where when one is grounded, yes, in spite of an intensely high non-native EMF environment, their clinical outcomes are better. So I want to just highlight that here because I do think we're finding that in our bodies, we need regular earthing and grounding for multiple reasons. And one of these certainly is the fact that it impacts the mitochondria. So, earthing has been found to be a direct redox support. Essentially, the flow of negative charge from the earth into our bodies can act as like an antioxidant, if you will. So, what are all antioxidants, anyways? So, why is vitamin C an antioxidant? Why do we have antioxidants in the body? An antioxidant has the ability to donate an electron and calm an oxidative reaction. So reactive oxygen species or inflammatory molecules, for example, what happens with lipid peroxidation or membrane damage, what happens is just that there are chemical species that are produced that are stealing electrons from things. And in the process of stealing an electron, that creates an inflammatory molecule. And that inflammatory molecule that needs an electron to stabilize itself will say, run into a membrane, try to grab an electron from the membrane to stabilize itself. But now you've created a new, oxidative species, essentially, that's also then going to look for an electron. And so it's basically, I would say inflammation is a bunch of electron thieves running wild. It's like they're stealing them and they don't know how to calm themselves down. These electrons like to live in pairs. They like to live in a kind of like a safety unit. And when you have a lost electron, that creates a very reactive molecule that's just looking to stabilize itself. But like I said, this can create a very vicious cycle. So research from people like Dr. James Oshman have, hypothesized that earthing acts as an electron reservoir. We know that when we touch the surface of the earth, we're able to pull that charge in from the earth. And we see that in before and after images of earthing in our blood. So red blood cells are designed to have this halo of negative charge around them called its zeta potential. When we see that lack of zeta potential, those red blood cells start to stick together and clump. But after earthing, we see that zeta potential is being reestablished. So there is this hypothesis that the charge from the earth is flowing into our bodies and it's able to reestablish healthy negative charge where it's lacking. Well, certainly if it can reestablish healthy negative charge in places like the blood, hypothetically speaking, we would also see it be able to act as an electron donor to calm these inflammatory oxidative conditions. We do see that in before and after images of earthing when it comes to individuals who are looking to get a thermographic scan of, say, an arthritic shoulder or knee that's showing up as a very intense red or inflamed joint before earthing. After earthing, that tissue starts to resolve. You start to see it becoming that the healthier blue and green state, meaning somehow being connected to the earth was able to calm an inflammatory cascade happening in the shoulder or happening in the knee. So certainly there's a lot of information indicating that earthing acts as this direct redox support, or essentially its own antioxidant support. But what we also see is improved mitochondrial bioenergetics, and that's what I'm going to highlight here. There's a specific study that I'm going to talk about that Dr. Laura highlighted in here that was really interesting when it came to improving mitochondrial function. So I'm going to go to that in a second. But the other benefits that we see are earthing are they go beyond just acting as an antioxidant. We know that earthing is actually can directly influence autonomic balance. As soon as we make contact with the earth, number one, we are discharging what we would call this buildup of static. We can have stray excess body voltage. That's not the same as cellular voltage. It's not the same as membrane voltage. Like we want an appropriate membrane voltage and cellular voltage at that level. But when we have stray body voltage, it acts like noise on a line. It acts as static. It's as if I'm trying to tune into my favorite radio station and try to hear that song in full, just complete clarity. However, what happens when I'm driving away from the radio tower? I start to get static and I can't hear the song as well. That static is what gets built up in our bodies. And when we earth and we ground, we discharge it into the earth. And that actually allows our body to connect more deeply with the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the earth, the 7.83 hertz cycle and its harmonics that organize everything from brainwave balance to our breath rate to literally our heart rate variability. So when we connect to the earth, within seconds, we see improvements in autonomic balance. Being connected to the earth has also been shown to improve circadian signaling, specifically normalizing a morning cortisol surge independent of our light environment, right? So you know me, I talk all about go outside, get your morning light to set your circadian rhythm, block the artificial light at night to set your circadian rhythm. Well, one of the most interesting articles I've come across is an article that had individuals who had dysregulated cortisol surges, meaning they were not in sync with that natural morning surge. Some of them were too early, too late, some are too flatlined, too high. And when individuals slept earthed and grounded, again, independent of light exposure, they started to normalize their healthy circadian cortisol curve, which also then ties to better sleep, better mitochondrial repair, better inflammatory status in the body. Essentially, what Dr. Laura highlights here is the sentence I want to pull out is that earthing isn't necessarily going to be like, oh, it's one thing, it's one mechanism. What she makes note of is that it appears as though these repeated electrical influences, meaning the repeated amount of like consistent earthing we can do, it's going to actually on several different bioelectrical levels may accumulate into meaningful mitochondrial protection across a lifespan. So I just found that to be really important to make note of is that we want to recognize that when we are exposed to like regular earthing, it's going to impact us in a cumulative fashion. Certainly we can see it, like I have clients who say right off the bat, they know that if they feel like their nervous system is out of whack, that they want to touch the earth, right? It has a very regulating effect on their nervous system. I have clients who say when they start to notice that their heart rate rhythm is out of whack, they earth and they ground right away, and they start to notice a stabilizing effect on their heart rate rhythm. And it's so certainly there can be this immediate impact. But it appears as though, in terms of our mitochondrial function and just in general, that if we can start to accumulate regular earthing exposures, like I am right now using a grounding mat, I'm using one of Dr. Laura's grounding mats underneath my desk. If we can accumulate regular earthing exposures over the course of our lives, it has a very regulating effect on multiple levels, including on mitochondrial function. And so that's a specific paper that I absolutely want to highlight here. And that's the idea that there was actually research that was done in 2025 that looked at the influence of grounding directly on mitochondrial function. So essentially, they took mitochondria in cells, so cell culture of mitochondria. They were mouse liver mitochondria essentially, and they studied them when they were grounded. So they had a group of them that was grounded and a group of them that was sham, right? So not grounded. And interestingly, in order to assess mitochondrial function, they developed a very, very unique fluorescent method to see, were there increased or decreased levels of ATP? What's happening at the level of electron flow or electron leakage? And they did that because they realized that the conventional metal probes you can use to assess it, like you can assess that what's happening at the level of mitochondria with metal probes, that those probes themselves can actually electrically ground the experimental system and make their results null and void. So I think they took really great care to be able to come up with these results. So what they did was they recognized that when the mitochondria were grounded, that increased ATP production by roughly 5 to 11%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but there's more to this as well. So not only did you have an increased ATP production of 5 to 11%, at the same time, reactive oxygen species production dropped by 22 to 33%. This is interesting, right? So when in this experimental condition, when the mitochondria were grounded, yes, you get an increase in ATP, but you also get a reduction in reactive oxygen species by 22 to 33%. So essentially, what you're seeing is that you're making mitochondria that are more efficient. So they're making more ATP, but they're leaking less electrons. When mitochondria can flow electrons beautifully through their electron transport chain, that is what helps to generate water and helps to drive the production of ATP. When mitochondria lose electrons from this process, when this process becomes inefficient, that's what starts to generate reactive oxygen species. So essentially, having grounded mitochondria appear to make more usable ATP energy. We can possibly hypothesize there'd be greater intracellular water production as well, but that wasn't tested in the study, and also produced less oxidative damage. So overall, you're setting the stage for healthy mitochondria and a very healthy intracellular terrain. Now it goes on beyond that. Well, a very interesting finding of this study that I thought was like, wait a second, what's happening here? Was that grounding also slightly lowered what's called the mitochondrial membrane potential. Remember, in order for mitochondria to make ATP, they've got to build up this gradient. So as electrons are flowing through, remember, electrons flow through the different steps to make water. But as the electrons flow through, the mitochondria are pumping protons into this inner membrane space and making this gradient, like blowing up a balloon. And this gradient, these protons are seeking a way out. There's a lot of proton pressure here. And the way that the mitochondria have developed for them to seek exit, to get away from that pressure, is through the ATPase. And that makes ATP. Now, this study found that grounding lowered the mitochondrial membrane potential 5 to 6%. And so at first glance, it's like, wait a second, I always thought that higher mitochondrial membrane potential was always better. But that's where it's a not necessarily. If you have what's called an excessively polarized mitochondrial membrane potential, that can actually increase electron leakage from the electron transport chain. It can increase reactive oxygen species production. So I think everything happening here is showing just an overall strengthening of the mitochondrial bioenergetic system. You get slightly lower mitochondrial membrane potential, maybe bringing it back from a hyperpolarized state. You have higher ATP output and lower reactive oxygen species or lower damage. So essentially, this is a beautiful way to reestablish healthy cellular bioenergetics. This connects directly to the redox framework in my Nourish Redox Drainage Detox pillars, my framework that I work with in clinical practice. Because redox is fundamentally about establishing the healthy electrical nourishment of a cell to be able to have the energy it needs to function at its best. So I love all things, about earthing and grounding. And again, can you do it through an outlet? It appears as though yes, because this study did it. And so many other studies have done it from that perspective. But when in doubt, I find people get a beautiful benefit when they do it outside. When you can touch earth with bare skin outside, you're not only getting the earthing and grounding benefits, you're getting the circadian rhythm benefits because you're signaling the correct light through the eyes. You're maybe focusing on nature. You're doing that soft focus in nature, which helps to bring your brain into that soft focus, calm state. Remember, when we're up close like this all the time with cell phones and computer screens, we need to cultivate that soft focus that improves things like our creativity and our brainwave state. So I love earthing and grounding. The name of the game isn't about, I got to do it for 60 minutes at a time for it to be the maximum benefit. That's the only way I get a benefit. And instead, we need to look at it as like, I'm going to earth and ground whenever I can. And those little frequent, small, consistent bouts of earthing will add up and accumulate over time into things like a balanced autonomic nervous system, into a stronger circadian rhythm. And with this beautiful research from 2025 that Dr. Laura then highlighted in her 2026 review, it appears as though we're also getting improved mitochondrial function, which establishes a healthy redox inside of the cell. If you're interested in learning more, check out the caption or the description. I'll put links to these studies. I also will have a link to my earthing and grounding protocol in case you want like just tell me what to do cheat sheet in terms of all the ways that you can earth and ground and bring this into your lifestyle on a regular basis. And I look forward to seeing you next time.